With me, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley and NBC News legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb. Thanks to all of you for being here. Yamiche, let me start with you. Thanks for being here in studio. What are you hearing from within the administration about the status of this fight? Is the Justice Department going to continue to dig in, or are they going to give the judge the information the judge is asking for?
It's a good question. It seems like the Justice Department is going to try to come up with some information that will give this judge partly what he wants, but the president today was very clear that he believes that he has the authority to sort of almost ignore part of what this judge is saying. He called him a radical, lunatic judge, left-wing judge. Of course, we know that there have been even Republicans who have been pushing back on President Trump's attacks on the judiciary. But that being said, the president feels like he has the wind at his back when it comes to this issue. He feels like he has this mandate, and the Department of Justice has been sort of really echoing that stance and echoing that in the court, which I think is really remarkable. And I remember last weekend when I realized that the Trump administration was literally ignoring a court order in that they had not stopped those planes mid-flight, that they did allow them to land in El Salvador, and that, by the way, they weren't denying that they did that. So this is really, I think, a Trump administration that's feeling emboldened.
Yeah, and Julia, it's so fascinating because you heard President Trump there talk about the quote-unquote thorough vetting process. What can you tell us about this process? Just how thorough is it?
We don't know because it never was presented in court. Unlike the normal judicial review process where you're going to have a prosecutor present in court everything that they have that either ties someone to a certain group or evidence of a crime, where you may even have a jury who can weigh in on whether or not there's enough evidence. We didn't have any of that here. Right now, they're saying that they are tying these people to this gang, Tren de Aragua, from Venezuela. They did not necessarily say any of them had or all of them had committed crimes. There's a rap sheet of some of the crimes they've told us about that we're supposed to just take at their word. And then they've also said in court declarations that many of them don't have a criminal history, but they just think it was only a matter of time until they would commit a crime in the United States. I'll tell you what's different about the way they're using the Alien Enemies Act now, besides the fact that we're not at war. But it's that they are focusing on this gang rather than a nationality, which actually makes it a lot harder to prove a connection to a gang than it would be, say, a nation that we are at war with.
And with that, let me go to Carol Lamb. Carol, let me read you part of Judge Boasberg's ruling from yesterday. He writes, quote, defendants shall file a brief showing cause why they did not violate the court's temporary restraining orders by failing to return class members removed from the United States on the two earliest planes that departed on March 15th, 2025. This speaks to the point that Yamiche was making. I mean, it sounds like the judge is effectively saying, I gave you a pretty clear court order and you violated it. Is that effectively what he's saying?
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying, or he's saying you haven't shown me that you didn't violate it. So what you would expect to see in response by the government is perhaps a declaration by someone saying, look, we put the order out, but the pilot said he didn't have enough fuel and he had to go to his destination. But the government is silent on what happened, which leads one to believe that they never even contacted the planes to tell them that the judge had made this order. And that's a real problem. This judge is trying to get to the bottom of a very simple matter, and he's being stonewalled by the government. And you can tell that the government had already lost so much before they even walked into court today, because the judge started off by saying, I have now read several pleadings that have intemperate and disrespectful language that I am not used to hearing from the government. When you get into this kind of fight as a government attorney with the court, you've already lost. And I'm not just saying that it's bad form, which it is, but what it means is that you've lost all credibility with the court. And the judge isn't going to believe anything you say. I think that's where the government is now.
Carol, what happens if the judge determines ultimately that this is a violation of his order? What, if any, recourse or remedy does this judge have?
Well, the judge can, it really depends what the evidence is. The judge has to determine whether these individuals are still within United States control. So can the United States simply say to the El Salvadorian government, bring these people back because a judge here has so ordered? I mean, it looks like they're still technically in U.S. custody. They've just sort of been contracted out for $6 million to another country. But we don't know any of those facts. We don't know purposefully on the part of the Department of Justice. They are simply stonewalling not just the court, but the American people.
Julia, let me turn back to you because the hearing just wrapped up. What do we know about what happened at this hearing that just wrapped up?
You know what? I'm going to have to get back to you. That's a pop quiz for me at this point.
It just wrapped up,
yes,
so that's okay that you're still doing it.
But I'm reading it on what our producers
You
have
keep
in
reading,
the
Yamiche.
courtroom.
Let me turn to you because politically speaking, this carries a fair amount of risks. I interviewed Leader Chuck Schumer, and he said to me, he thinks that this amounts to a constitutional crisis because you have President Trump saying that this judge should be impeached because his allies are saying this judge should be impeached. The chief Supreme Court justice weighing in and saying that impeachment is not a remedy to a disagreement with a court. Talk about the politics of this.
The politics of this is really remarkable because what you have here is Chief Justice Roberts, appointed by a Republican, though, of course, they say, of course, Supreme Court justices wear black robes, not blue or red. But there's this idea that you have a Republican appointed judge really trying to hold the line here and say, look, the party does a lot, but what we don't do is attack judges, and we don't sort of not go around the appeals process here. There's a way that we do this in our country so that we don't attack judges. But the president, again, feels like he has the wind at his back. The president has been making this argument that there's this deep state conspiracy theory and that he has this mandate that Democrats have really pushed back on this idea. But he believes he has this mandate because he won the popular vote in all the battleground states that he should essentially be allowed to do what he wants to do. And his allies and Republicans are echoing that message. So you really have sort of this present day argument that's feeding into this argument that President Trump has been making over years, almost a decade now, right? So I think in some ways the president's not going to stop. He's not going to slow down. But even more, you're going to also see, I think, other Republicans, unless they decide to hold the line like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, they're going to continue to echo this. So I imagine that this is going to be an argument that's just going to continue to ratchet up and ratchet up.
Okay, so Carol, if that happens, is that the very definition of a constitutional crisis? As Yamiche says, there's going to be this ratcheting up?
Well, it's hard to say what a definition of a constitutional crisis is. There's definitely a rub here where you have two supposedly co-equal branches of the government, and one is saying this falls within our realm of power, and the other is saying, well, no, the court is saying it has always been the province of the federal courts to decide on the constitutionality of laws and whether the other branches of government are acting within the confines of those laws. That is long-standing precedent in this country, and here, the Trump administration is saying we get to define what a war is, we get to define what an invasion is, and we get to define what a foreign government is. And in this instance, we've decided that a criminal gang from Venezuela is a foreign government and has committed an invasion by having some members come to the United States, and even that fact has not been proven. So what the judiciary is saying is that, no, you have to actually individually prove each of these things. And the government is saying, no, we don't. This is a political branch decision. So in that sense, yes, it is certainly a constitutional dispute. And I suppose you could call it a crisis as well in the sense that somebody is going to have to decide what is right here, and that should be the courts.
Well, it's something we'll watch very closely. And Julia, let me go back to you. I didn't mean to give you a pop quiz, but we should note that things are moving so quickly, and that as journalists, we are trying to keep up with these incredibly fast-moving developments. So we're literally just getting
thank you. And we should say, these court hearings are closed. So luckily, we have producers who are able to tell us what's going on while we're absorbing everything out here. So this is coming from our producer in the courtroom. Actually, Judge Boasberg did not rule one way or another about whether or not the Trump administration was in violation of his order. That may come. Actually, the newsiest thing coming out of this came from the plaintiff's attorney, Legal Alert. We've seen him a lot on our air. He said there were mistakes made, and he's about to file an affidavit saying that there were known mistakes made on Saturday night and that there were actually some people on these planes who came back to the United States, including women, because the president of El Salvador said, I'm not taking women, and that some of the people weren't even from El Salvador. So this is throwing this entire idea that they have to invoke this wartime power in order to target this very dangerous gang that they've labeled a terrorist organization into a whirlwind, because it's hard for them to point to the fact that they have enough evidence if mistakes were made. And in fact, the judge drilled Drew Ensign, who's a lawyer representing the Trump administration here, did you have advance notice this was coming? In other words, why were these mistakes made if you knew he was going to be signing this act? And he said it certainly could have been that they had advance notice, and he thinks it's likely that some of these mistakes were made.
That's a hugely significant twist, and one that we will continue to track very closely. Thank you so much, Julia, Yamiche, and Carol Lamb. Really appreciate the